Hello everyone, and welcome back to my Magic the Gathering Commander Deck List Reviews. So today we're going to be talking about a very infamous and a very popular commander. One of the most popular of all time. Usually it's thrown in the top 10 on EDH Rec. Really big and fairly old commander in terms of the most popular, the recent popularity of the format and when Wizards started designing for the cards. The Dragon. So, most people have heard of this card, but if you have not, it's kind of the big, scary 5-color dragon deck of the format. You know, if you're going for 5-color dragons, it's usually the Dragon, just because he's so good. And it was at a time during Commander that it was kind of sprouting, becoming more of a design space for Wizards rather than just, a supplementary thing like Modern, where they just got cards and that's how it was, that they had to kind of deal with what Standard had. So they decided to add in a few different things and try to kind of make some specific mechanics for Commander. And with that came sort of the mistake that is Eminence. So Eminence is an ability that basically says, no matter what card it's on, that this ability triggers whether the card is on the battlefield or if they're in the command zone. And so the core tenets of that being the fact that you don't actually have to play the card for the card to still have value and matter and change the game space is kind of the absurd part about it. As long as it's there in deck construction, it's good enough. It's part of the reason why Companions were so busted and they've had to change the rules 7 different times on what they can do, where you can play them, the bannings of all of them, because getting to do extra stuff for free, a huge awesome thing to be able to do in the game, and very powerful and something they got to really kind of tweak. So these initial 5, or I think it's the initial 4, especially the vampires with Edgar Markov and here with the Dragon are the really, really powerful ones. So let's read this card here. So the Dragon is a 9-mana 10/10 flying dragon avatar. He is all 5 colors. He's 4 and 1 of each. And he has Eminence. So as long as it is in the command zone or on the battlefield, other dragon spells you control cost one less to cast. So that by itself is an amazing ability. Honestly, I think if this card didn't have any other text, it would still be pretty dang good. I mean, it's good it has other text, and really surprising as far back as it was made that it does more stuff. Just a good card, honestly. Huge thing that just gives you value. You don't have to cast this at all during any of the games, and it's still really, really good for a dragon deck. But it does have an attack trigger that says whenever one or more dragons you control attack, draw that many cards, then you may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. So it's nothing to ask you to put more dragons on the battlefield. It's whatever you want. So there's quite a few avenues for this deck that you can take, and I've kind of made this deck with the intention of exploring those a little bit individually. But this is also sort of a pet deck that I kind of just throw the cool stuff I like in here. And as you can see from a lot of the cards, a lot of them are full art. About half the deck, I think a little over half the deck, is full art in some fashion. That's mostly because it's a thing I wanted to do for myself, where I'm just wanting to fully bling out a deck. So this deck does seem expensive. Right here you have this kind of TCG pricing that seems a little scary, but I wouldn't worry too much about that, because if you got the base editions of most of these cards, they wouldn't be nearly as expensive as they are here. This is just my personal deck, and this is what I'm kind of showing off here. And our mana base is pretty hefty, barring true dual lands, it's got pretty much everything. So you could also really cut down on the price there as well. But yeah, so basically the Dragon, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to cast dragon spells. Very obvious, they cost less, we really want to get them out there, and we want to attack with dragons and put permanents from our hand onto the battlefield, and that's really important. We'll come to that later with this cheaters category. A very, very powerful effect, and something you can leverage more if you want to. But this is very much a dragon-centric deck. We do have down here 20 different dragons that I will be going through throughout the course of all these different pieces to the deck. And some, other honorable mentions that help dragons or do stuff with dragons, but we're very much focused on the dragon game plan. So number 1, the first thing we got to do is, if we want to play these dragons, we got to have ways to cast them, which means lots and lots of mana. So we've got 23 ramp spells, and not all of these are true ramp spells. Like the first one here is Ancient Copper Dragon, but stuff that just makes mana that can give you a bunch of mana that, you can use later on. So Ancient Copper Dragon, one of the most notorious that's played in a lot of different decks, because treasures recently have become extremely broken within Commander. It is part of the Elder Dragon cycle, by which there I think are 4 in here. I'm not running Ancient Silver Dragon, where when they deal damage to a player, you roll a d20 and you do whatever that many times equal to the result of the die roll. So with here, this is the most busted because when you hit someone, you roll d20 and you make that many treasure tokens. So, you know, best case scenario, you're making 20 treasure tokens, but most of the time you're making around 10 as an average, 11 maybe. It's pretty insane. Like even one hit from this can really completely change a board state, getting an extra 10 or so mana. It's pretty crazy, really good card. So it's technically ramp, but by the time you have him out and you're swinging with him, you may not need it as much, but I threw it in here just because it kind of fits the category. Then we have a lot of our basic stuff, you know, our mana dorks, mana rocks, mana, you know, ramp tutoring, whatever. So Arcane Signet, Birds of Paradise, just, you know, and that's another thing with the deck is so much of our stuff is slower and more high costed that really a lot of these low costed spells are super duper important to get out early game because you're going to be slower than most other decks just because most of the dragons you're casting are 5-6 mana and above, really expensive stuff. So you really want to make sure that you're hitting those when you can. So Birds of Paradise, Bloom Tender, really good for this deck because it's 5 color. Burgeoning, one of the best for this deck, and one that you really want to be careful with when you're playing it, because let's say you got 2 lands in hand and you have a Burgeoning, it's not super good. You really want to play this card when you've got, you know, your starting hand has like 4 or so lands and then a Burgeoning, because that means you can play your land, play one if you're in a 4-player pod on each of your opponent's turns, and you'll start turn 2 with, if you've got another land drop, 5 lands, or even if you don't, really just getting 4 lands turn 2 is kind of insane. So a really good card for 1 mana. It's a pretty big importance piece in going fast to really get that ramp out. This is one of the best pieces for the deck, and it's awesome with your fetch lands and stuff because you can get surveil lands or, you know, triumphs or whatever that are tapped. Really good. Good card for the deck, and something that's kind of in a similar vein, and this is one thing I would consider more of a flex slot. So some of these decks do have slots that I wouldn't say are questionable, but are slots that, you know, maybe you might switch out for 1 or 2 cards because, you know, when you're playing at 100 different cards, not every single one of them is going to be fully optimized. And this is one of them that Carpet of Flowers is usually more of a CDH card because more people are playing blue in CDH and you're getting more islands to happen, and more people are playing cards that literally say island on them with like True Duels and fetch lands and shock lands and whatever. So Carpet of Flowers just says during one of your main phases you may add up to X mana of 1 color to your mana pool, where X is the number of islands target opponent controls. So really, even if you only have one opponent that is playing blue and you play this, your second main phase, you get 1 mana because they control 1 island. That's really not that bad. That's just basically you're playing an extra land for 1 mana. Pretty okay, and it can be better or worse depending on what people are playing. If you've got a mono blue deck, that's usually the best case scenario, but one that you could take out very easily. It's just kind of one of those that's gives you a little extra mana sometimes. And next up, we got another one that's sort of like Ancient Copper Dragon. So this is Cavern Horde Dragon, and the cool thing is he's got a 9 mana cost, which is pretty expensive, but it's reduced. The color list is reduced by the opponent who controls the greatest number of artifacts. So someone's got 5 artifacts on the board. This guy will only cost 2 mana or 4 mana. And 3 mana if you got their dragon as your commander. So you can really reduce that. This one is a little bit weirder and doesn't happen all the time, that you may also have as a flex slot. I just think it's a really cool one to kind of showcase that doesn't go into every deck, but a cool card, and really depending on your meta might be better. Let's say, you know, I'm someone who loves artifacts, and I have like 5 different artifact decks. So this card is going to be really good against me, basically no matter what I'm playing, because I am going to have a lot of stuff out that will make him really inexpensive. And he also he's a 6 mana Flampler with haste, pretty good. You know, you're going to get through and hit immediately. So even if you're paying, I don't know, 7 mana for this, 6 mana for this, it's still pretty good stats by itself. But it also has a combat damage trigger that says when you deal damage to a player, you create a treasure token for each artifact that player controls. So really what you're trying to do is like, hey, someone controls 5 artifacts, I'm going to play him for, you know, 3 or 4, swing, hit, and then I'm going to make a bunch of treasures. So it's a really good card in that way, but this is kind of more meta dependent. And this is sort of another category of ramp, which is mana fixing, which is especially important if you're not going to be playing this really expensive mana base that has a lot of the mana fixing and dual color lands and fetches that grab what you need. With Chromatic Lantern, it adds a color of any type, and it gives your lands the ability to tap for whatever color. So just good mana fixing. Same thing down here with Dryad of the Elysian Grove, just extra mana fixing. And it allows you to play an additional land, which can matter early game. But yeah, definitely good for those decks that are going to be running a similar mana base. Having these mana fixers are more important, and they're still good here, but, you know, mana fixing matters a whole lot more earlier game. And then we got a few other things, you know, Cultivate, Dragon Speaker Shaman. There's quite a few different effects you can run like this. Like I think I had an Urza's Incubator in here at one point. It just makes your Dragon Spells cost 2 less. So this is sort of another Dragon ability, which can actually matter a lot in the deck. Sometimes this could, I have it in the ramp category because it is sort of ramp, and a lot of times can be better than ramp because it's not mana that you're paying, it's just a reduction. So you could really get a lot of mana value out of this card depending on how many dragons you're playing and when. And then over here, we kind of got the second Bloom Tender with Faber Elder, 1 more mana, but it's also bigger, has Vigilance. Matters a lot more in a 5-color deck, Farseek and Fista Sun. So this one I put in the ramp category because it a lot of times does actually sort of ramp you, reduce its costs at the very least. So for the Ur-Dragon is kind of the best thing here, because it basically makes Ur-Dragon only cost Wooburg rather than 4 in Wooburg. So really, if you think about it, it's reducing his mana by 1 because you're paying 3 for the card and you're putting him out. But there's other things this card can do. It's any spell as well. It's not just Ur-Dragon. So if you have a 6 mana card that, you know, you may not want to pay for, or you may have seen this Omniscience over here, another good card to rather pay 5 mana for than 10. So kind of cool there. And there's another piece to this that does make it a combo, which is pretty cool, that I'll talk about once we get there. Next we got Goldspan Dragon. This one is more of a ramp piece, especially in this deck, because he only costs 4 mana when you're casting him. But he's a 4/4, you know, flyer with haste, and when he attacks, he creates you a treasure token that taps for 2. Taps and sacks for 2. So that's kind of the best part of it. And if he gets removed, he also gives you another treasure token. So he's kind of a 2-for-1 in that way. And people do like removing this guy because he's pretty good. And we're actually playing quite a few cards that make treasure tokens because dragons like treasure. So pretty good, honestly. And people play Hedron Archive or sometimes Sisay's Ring. You know, 4 mana for 2 mana as sort of a mana rock is pretty good. And this is a lot of extra on top of that as well. So pretty good card, really cool staple. And you know, with that kind of artwork out there, the Dungeons and Dragons, I think it's the, oh, it even has it on here. Yeah, the red box edition from 1983. Really awesome artwork, really famous artwork, kind of a cool card to run in. We got Harrow, and that's actually one thing I do want to talk about here with Harrow and Cultivate. If you haven't noticed yet, we are only running 5 basics, so 1 of each type in here. So if you're going to be playing any of these cards with the mana base that I have right now, you want to be very careful that you have enough lands to actually search, because I believe it's only Cultivate and Harrow that searches for basic lands. Everything else you can kind of go grab what you want with the Nature's Lord and Skyshroud Claim and such. So you want to definitely make sure if you have these cards in your opening hand, you don't have basics. Really, in any case, you don't really want basics in your hand because let's say you get past exiled or at some point you get strip mined or whatever have you. You really want to make sure that you have basics to go search up for those effects, because you don't really want to, you know, sack a land and only be able to get 1 land back, or maybe you just Stone Rain yourself. Not the greatest thing. But like I said, Nature's Lore, same thing with down here with 3 visits, same card, just go grab your forests. But we do have a bunch of Shocklands and Triomes, so they're better than normal. The cool thing is they come in untapped, and that's kind of the big thing of it. Same thing, Skyshroud Claim, it's just you smash both of them together. Grab some more lands. We just need a lot of ramp for this deck. It's really important. Same thing with the Soul Ring and Thought Vessel. I picked up the entire secret lair this was from, so I kind of just threw it all in here. Looks really cool, really expensive. I did not expect that when I first picked it up, but kind of a cool one. And Old Gnawbone is sort of the honorary 5th ancient dragon that when it deals combat damage to a player, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you make that many treasure tokens. So this is also part of a combo because it's just so insanely busted. Even if he's not attacking, even if you're getting in for 2 damage, it's still generating you 2, you know, mana for free. Just a really, really good card, and really cool to run on the deck because it makes a lot of mana. You have a lot of dragons that you're attacking with. Very, very cool. And then we got Ramos. So this is also sort of a weird one, but works really well within this deck. So whenever you cast a spell, you put a counter on him for each of that spell's colors. So if you're casting a 2-color spell, it gets 2 counters, you know, 3-color spell, 3, whatever. But the cool thing is you can remove 5 +1/+1 counters from him and add double Wooburg. So really what this effect does, the cool part about it, is you cast a few spells. You want Ramos out, you cast a few spells until he gets up to 5 counters, and then you remove 5 counters from him, and it basically gives you Ur-Dragon mana. You get 1 extra, but once you cast Ur-Dragon, because it's all 5 colors, it immediately gives you those counters back. So kind of just a way to easily get to Ur-Dragon earlier on, and he's completely colorless mana, which is usually a lot easier to get out because a lot of these dragons are double red pips. That's most of it, or just have a lot of colored mana. So this is the easiest to get out. And, you know, he gets big really fast. You know, getting him to 9 or 10 or above is pretty easy. Yeah, so that's kind of all of our ramp package. And next, over here, we got card advantage. So this is kind of the other part of it. You want to make sure you have the dragons when you actually can cast them. So we have a bunch of different things included here. Also have stuff like tax effects and tutors, and just anything that gives us more cards in our hand. So Brainstorm, of course, is really good, especially if you're running this mana base because we're running so many fetches. You're able to kind of shuffle away those cards that you put back to the top, which is really good. Demonic Tutor, Demonic Tutor, Esper Sentinel, just kind of another one that is more of a flex slot. I mean, really, the tutors you could add in or take out depending on how high level you really want to go. But they're great in this deck. Esper Sentinel is just kind of one of those that, like I said earlier, it's good to have stuff down at the lower mana values if you can. They're more important for this deck because you don't run a whole lot of that stuff. So getting Esper Sentinel down early is awesome because it gives you more time to, kind of build up and get more value early on. Ponder, a really good card, and it's got a dragon on it from the Dragon Secret Lair, so kind of got to add to the deck. Felt like a must. And then we've got both of these sort of draw equal to power cards. Return of the Wild Speaker, a pretty cool one. Although I can't tell you the number of times I've drawn with Ur Dragon on the battlefield, so you're paying 5 mana, drawing 10. Pretty good. Very much a positive draw. You don't really use the non-human pump second half of this all that often, just because the dragons are big enough, and by the time you're swinging with this, that this would really make a difference between pumping maybe 2 creatures. You're going to win anyway, so you don't really need the pump most of the time, but the card draw, is fantastic. And Rishkar's Expertise really is the better of the two. You're paying 1 extra mana, but the fact that you get to free cast something for 5 mana is extremely good and makes it a lot better. And I actually have a few times cast Rishkar's Expertise, drawn into or had a Return of the Wild Speaker in my hand, and cast that. So you're just drawing a whole bunch of cards, and even if you can't cast them, because of Ur Dragon's put ability, that's part of it. With the card advantage in this deck is you also want to have cards in hand and permanents to be able to put into play with Ur Dragon's ability, so it's meaningful, since you're only getting to put 1 permanent down, and you really want to make that permanent count. I can't tell you the number of times I put down a Sensei's Divining Top or a land or something, because I don't really have anything that good, so it's kind of important. But as I was talking about Sensei Divining Top, it's a good card. It's just a generically good card. Another one that's really awesome to have shuffle effects for with the fetch lands, because you're able to kind of put stuff back you don't want and then tutor stuff away and shuffle it away and get something new. Sargon's Triumph, a lot of times it's just another demonic tutor because you're tutoring for dragons, especially when it comes to certain dragons that you need on the board or ones that you want to have very often. Kind of an auto-include in any dragon deck. And then Tiamat, the ultimate dragon tutor. You go tutor for 5 different stuff when it enters the battlefield if you cast it. So go grab 5 differently named dragons, which is really easy with this deck. And this one's kind of interesting because you don't really want to cast it most of the time unless you know that turn or the next turn you could really win. Because when you're tutoring 5 cards to hand, most of the time you're going to be discarding one. So you're either getting less value off the Tiamat, or you're just putting a huge target on your back because you've got all these threats in your hand now. And then also Vampiric Tutor, another generically good one, though I do have to say both Brainstorm and Vampiric Tutor I've used together a few times, being able to tutor to top to draw, because sometimes you need removal and you need it now. But kind of a cool little thing there. But yeah, just a few generic things. You could add more card draw here. I don't think it's super necessary. There's only been a few times I've run into dry spells, but that can happen with any deck. So kind of just a good thing there. We also have a few interaction pieces. This is another thing that's kind of a flex slot. Where you can kind of increase or decrease the amount of spells you're playing here, depending on your meta. I said this in a previous video, but I don't really have, my LGS doesn't have a super interaction heavy meta, so I'm not having to worry about having too many of these spells in my deck that often to interact with pieces. Especially protection pieces more than, getting rid of. I'm almost always running a swords or in a path in most decks just because it's good enough. 1 mana, you're going to want that. So we got generic counter spell. We got Deflecting Swat, which is sort of a non-bow in this deck because most of the time, this cycle of cards really wants you to have your commander out to cast it for free. But it's got Corvald in the art, so I thought it was, a worthy include, a really cool, dragon cards. Kind of felt in theme with the deck, but most of the time you're not going to have Ur Dragon on the battlefield, so you're usually paying 3 mana for it, but even then, it's not super duper horrible. I feel like it's kind of a counter spell and sometimes even better. It's not really all that bad. And Mana Drain is another one that is very much a flex slot. You don't need a Mana Drain in this deck. I will say that it's sort of in that ramp category where there's a lot of times I'll counter like a Gilded Lotus or something that costs, 3, 4, 5 mana, usually 4 and up. that allows me to cast Dragon or something, because it is kind of a ramp spell, and that's kind of one of the reasons it's one of the more expensive ones, because it's just a counter spell but better. Giving you that colorless mana can actually help a lot of times. So that's how I would more use this if you could, because it kind of gives you max value, because you are putting down someone whatever they've got, and you are giving yourself a huge increase in mana on your next turn or next main phase. And that's something I didn't know for the longest time, that if you counter something on your turn, you can get that mana immediately if you're still in your first main phase, which is really cool. And the Nature's Claim is just kind of a generic one that I think any deck that is playing green should be running this if it doesn't have any deck restrictions, because it's just, $1, not an expensive card to get, but it's just the best artifact enchantment removal in the game. Might as well. It's just a really, really good card. Swords to Plowshares, like I said, just another creature removal. You could put more in here, but most of the time you're the one that's the threat and you have more stuff to deal with, and you can usually block if there's creatures. Your stuff is big enough to kind of do what you want, but one extra removal piece, and there's other things that can remove stuff in this deck as well. And then Teferi's Protection, other one that if you can, you might as well throw into any deck that's white, because it can kind of save you, quite literally make you win the game, or make you not lose the game at the very least. A lot of times, a very, very good card. And so one of the weird categories we have here is this graveyard category. So this deck used to be Sign of the Dragon, and so it very much cared about reanimation targets, which is why Reanimate's in here specifically. It's still a really good card. Like, I would recommend for most decks that are in black just to run Reanimate, because there's a lot of times that even with the cards in this deck, you have something that dies. You can even pay 6 life, get that back for 1 mana, and it's worth it. Or because this is any graveyard, you can get a lot more value out of it with other people's pieces, especially if they're running graveyard decks too, because they usually have something really cool to reanimate. So just a generically good card. And then we have 2 of these regrowth effects with regrowth, and then good recovery, which is also land if you really, really need it. Usually don't want to really go into that. There are 33 lands in the deck, a lot of ways to tutor them out. So you definitely want to save this for the recovery if you can. And then also the Ancient Brass Dragon that just, when it deals damage, you roll a d20, and you can put any number of target creature cards with total mana value X or less from any graveyards, onto the battlefield under your control, where X is the result. So this is just kind of a sort of mass reanimation thing, just kind of a fun extra effect, just doing the dragon thing, just kind of a fun thing to throw around. And we do actually run a few board wipes in the deck as well. Not a whole lot. Every deck that has dragons in it that runs black is going to run Crux of Fate, because it's one-sided. Why not run a one-sided board wipe? It's just really good. In Supreme Verdict, I have actually had it come up where the can't be countered is just really important, and we're mana fixed enough that kind of wonky Azorius mana cost doesn't matter too much. But yeah, just having a counter spell you know is going to go through is pretty valuable. So next up, I'm going to talk about these kind of cheaters. So this is sort of a category that I put in the kind of stuff you really want to be putting into the battlefield with Dragon's ability, those type of cards, or stuff that just cheats in by themselves. So for Dragon's ability, it says permanent, so you can put into whatever you want into play. You can put in Eldrazi, or whatever, huge thing, but I kind of just put in enchantments because Eldrazi want the cast triggers. So I feel like the best things are just the kind of thing that's going to win you the game or give you some sort of crazy effect for what would normally be a lot of mana for very cheap. So Omniscience, of course, probably the best one you could ever add, or you can just kind of cast spells from your hand without paying their mana cost. This one kind of just wins you the game, if not that exact turn, the next turn, because you're casting all your dragons for free. You're just throwing out crazy value. It doesn't really matter if the game's over. Fire Emancipation is sort of in a similar vein. This one actually usually can win you the game right then, because it's a combat, an attack trigger rather than a damage trigger. There have been times in the game where I can get out Dragon, attack, put down Fire Emancipation, and then, not everyone has flying blockers. Dragon deals 30 commander damage, and you can just one-shot someone right there. You almost do in general because it's 30 damage, but it's a guaranteed one-shot with that, which is pretty cool. And I think one of the best cards in the entire deck right here is Hellkite Courser, honestly. It's an amazing card from the original Commander Legends set that says when it enters the battlefield, you may put a commander you own from the command zone onto the battlefield. It gains haste. That's really important. Return to the command zone at the beginning of the next end step. So you don't get to keep it forever, but you do get one turn with it, and a lot of times that can be enough. So this is kind of the card where you can play this, get your commander. It doesn't get cast, which is really cool because it doesn't up its commander tax, and it gets to run any counter spell. So if they don't counter this, you just get your commander, and it's got haste. So you can immediately swing in with your Dragon, put down an Omniscience or a Fire Emancipation, and this is probably the quickest win in the deck, just because you can get so much value from just that one trigger. It's just a really, really good trigger, and Even 10 damage command in the air is pretty good. Nothing to sneeze at. And then sort of the other half of the combo that I was talking about earlier with Fist of Suns is Morophon. So Morophon is a changeling. It's every creature type, so it's always a dragon. It says when it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. And spells of the chosen type you cast cost Wooburg less to cast, and this only affects the amount of code mana you'd pay. And it's also a lord, so it gives all your creatures of the chosen type +1/+1. So you're always choosing dragon with this. Of course, it's a dragon deck. So by itself, it's still a really good card because it's a 6 mana card with Dragon in the command zone. And when it enters, it is kind of the opposite effect of Fist of Suns, where instead of reducing the colorless mana, it reduces the colored mana. So you only have to pay 4 for Dragon, which is honestly the better of the two. Pretty good. And all of your other dragons that have colored pips, usually the red pips, it can also reduce that. And if you're playing something specific like Miram Sentinel Worm, you can play that for 2 mana, which is pretty insane. So the other half of this is with Fist of Suns, because Fist of Suns says that instead of paying the mana cost of whatever, you may instead play the alternative cost of Wooburg. You can pay this cost, and with Morophon out, that cost is reduced by itself. So you're casting for 0 mana. So this is sort of a pseudo-omniscience effect where it allows you to cast dragon spells for free. The only cool part about this over omniscience is the fact that it's just from anywhere. It doesn't specify that spells from your hand have to be cast this way, so you can cast Dragon for free as well, which is really cool. So this is another one that if you can get both those pieces out, is just kind of game. It's just really good, and even Morophon by itself is just a really good card to have out for those effects. So another one, Monster Manual is a card I don't see played enough because I think it's just kind of insane. It's a really cool card because it's got 2 sort of abilities, especially for this deck. It's pretty good. So it does have an adventure, a zoological study that says mill 5 cards, then return a creature card milled this way from your to your hand. So it's kind of like a Scry 5 or Surveil 5 most of the time. You can just kind of get a dragon that you may need, and you're getting to look at quite a few cards. Card advantage, always good, but it's really cool for this because you can also send it on an adventure and cast it for the artifact side later. So get a card in your hand that you might need, and we do have a few different reanimation effects if we really needed it. I have a few times in tandem cast the adventure and then reanimated whatever. Another one that is sort of left over from the Sign of the Air Dragon, but it's still a really good effect, especially because even if you never cast the adventure, the normal part is just insane. So it's a 4-mana artifact that says pay 2, tap it, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. And that is absolutely insane. Because even if you are paying full price for this, all in one turn where you pay 4 and pay 2 to tap it and put something on the field, you're only paying 6 mana, which is about the curve of our dragons, to basically put a creature onto the battlefield, which is uncounterable. Besides Stifles and that sort of thing. It doesn't go onto the stack, it's just the ability that goes onto the stack. And it's also instant speed. So you're able to flash in a creature someone else's end step and kind of give it pseudo haste when it untaps on your return. And you also get to, cover up information. So you don't want to make sure that, you're the threat at someone's end step or someone else gets swung at and you don't look all that, scary. Use Monster Manual. And it's also, an effect that you can use multiple times. So use Monster Manual whenever you want, whenever you have that, best advantage, and kind of just swing out and kill people. I've used this in a bunch of different decks, and it's amazing in every single one of them, especially if you have untap effects like Seedborn Muse or kind of whatever. You don't really have to go that far by itself. I think it's just a great card. And lastly, here we have Selvala Stampede. So this is kind of a cool one, back from Conspiracy. It's got Council's Dilemma, so everyone votes. Starting with you, each player votes for wild or free. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card for each wild vote. Put those creature cards onto the battlefield, and then shuffle the rest into your library. You may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield for each free vote. And so that's something to note with this card, is it's sort of like the Dragon, where it allows you to put permanents into play. So a lot of times, Omniscience, you can just kind of throw down and win the game again. So this card, if your opponents are playing correctly, basically says, hey, go cascade for a creature, put it on the battlefield, and then put some stuff from your hand onto the battlefield as well. Because really, you don't want to give, if you're a smart opponent to whoever cast this, you want to make sure that people aren't getting even more advantage from seeing more cards from their deck to cast those creature spells. Though I have to say, being able to put a permanent card, not a creature card, from your hand on the battlefield can sometimes matter a whole lot more, especially with this deck. So this card has a varying amount of worth because it's kind of dependent on your situation. If you don't have a whole lot in your hand, it's not as good. You're still getting something for free from your deck, so it's not horrible. But really, this card I think is good once you've at least hit to double the mana value worth of spells from casting it. So let's say you get 2 6-mana dragons or what have you. That's where I think it really is efficient. And that's what you're really wanting to hit. At the very least, you want to hit at least enough that the spell pays for whatever you're casting for. At least 6 mana, if not a little bit more. So another kind of fun card that I think is really, really good for the deck. So we also have up here tokens. So these is kind of generic. We've kind of already gone through a few token things. But these are specifically dragon tokens because it can matter within the deck. And we're a dragon deck. We want to attack with dragons. It triggers a dragon. So these are specifically dragon tokens. So first up, we've got, I believe, the second to last Ancient Dragon with Ancient Gold Dragon. He's a 7/10, which is a crazy stat line, but he's also, I think, the most expensive, or no, he's tied for the most expensive of the Ancient Dragons. So his trigger says when you roll a d20, when you hit, you create a number of 1/1 blue fairy dragon creatures equal to the result. With flying. So this is kind of an instant board, which is why it's so good. Where you're able to just be like, okay, you know, I get 6 even. You're getting 6 1/1 flyers that, if nothing else, are blockers, but can get in the next turn. It's just a really, really good card. And with some cards I'll be talking later in the value category, can kind of just win you a game on the spot because it's just kind of an insane effect. And next up we have Lathless, which is a little different. Instead of going wide, it's kind of a go tall, where whenever another non-token dragon enters, you create a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying. So it kind of doubles your value of dragons because most dragons are 5/5s or 6/6s. So you're kind of just getting that little bit of extra, but still extremely good. And if you really needed to, I don't think I've ever activated the ability, but it can, you know, it gives your dragons fire breathing if you really need it. On the other side of that, we also have Utvara Hellkite, which is kind of the best generic dragon token creator, that whenever you attack with a dragon, token or non-token, that's the crazy part about this, you create a 6/6 red dragon creature token with flying. Now, not only is that stat line a little above what most effects do, usually dragon creation effects are 4/4s and sometimes 5/5s. It's kind of absurd to make 6/6 dragons. That's a really high stat line. But because it doesn't say non-token, when those tokens that you create, let's say you're attacking with 3 dragons on your turn, you then create off his ability 3 more untapped 6/6 dragons. So not only can you just kind of swing out and keep a board up, but you're basically doubling your board every turn, because next turn you have 6 dragons to swing out with, which creates 6 more dragons, and you can just kind of go bonkers with it. It's a really, really great effect, and one that you don't really see all too often because he is an 8-mana card, but late game can kind of just sweep the board. And this one I kind of skipped over because I want to talk about it last, is Miram's Sentinel Worm. So it says whenever another non-token dragon enters, you create a token copy of it, except the token isn't legendary if that dragon is legendary. And that part is kind of the big part of this. So if, you know, you have Miram on the field and you play a Lathless, you get a second Lathless, which means they trigger each other and a bunch of crazy stuff happens. You know, Miram is kind of the turbo token generator here, and really the token or the turbo trigger generator, because you're creating so many copies of really, really good cards. Even like Utvara Hellkite, that's kind of insane because now you're tripling your board every turn. A really, really good, the best token creation effect in the deck by far, because you get so much value out of it. It's just kind of insane. But any of these really having on the board are amazing, especially when it comes to Ancient Gold Dragon, Utvara Hellkite, just because you're getting crazy value. Just go wide, go tall, whatever. Just attack with dragons. And lastly, here we do have our value category. I will talk about the lands when we get to the end here, but just for the main deck. So value, this is kind of the miscellaneous piece where most of these other categories, they kind of fit here and there, but they're just kind of generically good. So first up, we have the other half of the Old Gnawbone combo with Aggravated Assault. So with Old Gnawbone out, Aggravated Assault I should talk about first. It's a 3-mana enchantment that you can pay 5 and untap all your creatures to get an extra combat. Pretty okay. It's really not that bad with this deck because not a lot of stuff comes down on turn 3. So you can kind of just play this out. Most people won't really think of it as a target because, you know, you're not really activating it, or it's not really viable usually until the turn you're about to win. But still a really good card because with our Old Gnawbone, just these 2 cards go infinite. Because whenever Old Gnawbone attacks or deals combat damage, he's making 7 treasure tokens. And you can pay 5 of those treasure tokens into this to get an extra combat. You can just kind of kill each other. So this is one of the fastest ones in the deck as well, where if you can get Old Gnawbone out really fast, maybe off an Ur-Dragon trigger or whatever, but let's say you're playing Hellkite Courser, you get down Ur-Dragon, you attack, and you play Old Gnawbone. You can then get out Aggravated Assault off 10 treasures, and just kind of start doing the infinite loop where as long as you're making at least 5 treasures when you attack, so it could also work with Ancient Copper Dragon if you just high roll a little bit. It's not certifiably infinite, but it's very, very close, and most of the time it's enough that you're just making a billion treasures and attacking a billion times, and that's kind of the game. So this can be an extremely good piece. It's kind of situational, but still one I would definitely recommend running in the deck if you are running those pieces, because it's so good. And even if you aren't, a lot of times just getting one extra combat out of it, like I said, it's pretty much free to cast because you're not casting a lot of other stuff at that same mana value. So later on, it's just kind of a casual win con that most people aren't looking at that can definitely get you there. And next up, we have the last Elder Dragon here with Ancient Bronze Dragon. So whenever it deals combat damage, it puts X +1/+1 counters on up to 2 target creatures where X is the result. So you roll 10, you put 10 counters on 2 things. It's a cool effect and it's pretty strong. We're just not really a counters deck that cares too much about it. So it's, again, just kind of another value piece. Though with Aggravated Assault and any of these effects that deal damage, you're attacking with giant creatures usually the next time around. So just kind of a cool effect. It's a cool dragon. Throw it in here. That's what we're doing. And next up, we have Dragon Tempest. So this is one that I would definitely recommend for this deck. It's one of the best cards in here, because one thing we really, really value is haste. And that's such a huge part of the deck. I actually had Karthus in here for quite a long time because it gives all dragons haste. But there are too many times that I still have everyone's dragons, and I'm not really a huge fan of like stealing archetypes. So I kind of took him out, but the haste is super, super good because you want to be able to get down these big threats like Old Gnawbone and Uvara Hellkite and immediately attack. It's such a huge deal because you're playing such huge threats, and so you're usually arch enemy even before the game starts, just because you're playing dragons, really powerful creatures that are really hard to block. So this basically says when dragons enter the battlefield, they gain haste. It's just flying creatures, but all of our creatures of flying are dragons. So it gives your dragons haste for 2 mana. Really, really good, really cool to get down early, and just a really great card. But the second effect is also just as important. It says whenever a dragon enters your control, it deals X damage to any target where X is the number of dragons you control. So this kind of goes crazy with Ancient Gold Dragon or any of these things that make a whole bunch of tokens when they enter. Because let's say you attack with Ancient Gold Dragon, and then you have, you roll a 10 on the die. That's pretty much game, because each of those is going to see 11 dragons on the battlefield, and they're going to see each other. So it's just an insane amount of damage that goes onto the stack, and you're killing pretty much everyone, or at least putting them extremely low life totals with something like that happening. And it also gives Ancient Gold Dragon haste, so usually it's boop, boop, dead. Really, really cool, really big effect that we actually run a few of in the deck, besides Dragon Tempest, that second effect, just because it's so insanely good. We talked about Fire Emancipation, but we got Lightning Greaves in here because it's kind of the 2 pieces where it's not only that haste, but the Shroud is also extremely important, especially for keeping stuff like Old Gnawbone around or Ur-Dragon, whatever, what have you. That protection is really important. It's why it's run in pretty much every deck it can be, because it's really, really good. And so this is kind of the epitome here with Roaming Throne of value pieces, because it's, I put it in the dragon category because it's almost always going to be a dragon, just not in deck construction, where it's just going to double the triggers of all your dragon effects, which is pretty insane. And if you ever manage to get Miram on the battlefield before you cast this Roaming Throne, what ends up happening is Roaming Throne enters as a dragon, and so Miram's trigger triggers twice when it enters because it sees a dragon enter the battlefield. So it gives you 3 Roaming Thrones. And it took me a minute to math it out because there were so many different triggers, and all the Roaming Thrones trigger off of each other because they are all dragons. But it basically means that if you got 3 Roaming Thrones out that are all in dragon, every single effect that it is tied to a dragon triggers 10 times. The original plus 9 copies. It's insane. And if you ever manage to get that off, you're basically going to kill everyone. It's too insane. Like, with Utvara Hellkite, for every single dragon that attacks, you're making 10 6/6s. Like, that's insane. It's a crazy effect, and one that's kind of hard to pull off because you have to have both cards and you have to play them and sequence them correctly. But if you're able to do it, it's super cool. It's worth just playing at least once, even if you're gold fishing, to see what kind of things you come up with, because it's a crazy effect, and it's cool to see the decks do something like that. So here, this is very much another value piece, very good for the kind of the protection category, where whenever a dragon you control becomes a target of a spell or an ability an opponent controls, you get to destroy target non-land permanent that player controls. So this sort of gives your stuff hexproof, or at the very least, ward sacrifice target permanent, because most people don't want their stuff blown up, even if that means that they can't blow up your stuff, because it usually means a commander or a really good piece goes away. And so much removal in the game is Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, what have you. That's all creature removal. And this is just any non-land permanent, so it's usually a lot harsher on their side because you blow up their Bolas's Citadel or, you know, anything crazy, their Chimil, whatever huge thing they have on the board, their crazy value piece, because you get way more targets for their stuff. So a really good card. It definitely makes it. I've had so many times. I think this. I've only triggered Scalelord Reckoner once or twice in the games that I've played with him, because once he's down, people just don't target your stuff. The threat of activation is too crazy. It's too much of a burden. It's like Expropriate, where a lot of times I've seen with Expropriate, especially newer players that don't know the value of an extra turn, won't give up their permanents, even if they have basically nothing on the board, because, you know, Commander players, they don't like being messed with. They don't like their stuff getting touched. So they don't want you to steal their stuff or blow up their stuff, so they'll just let whatever happens anyway and just try to race you to the finish. Interaction is definitely not the first word that comes to mind for a lot of them. So this is a really, really good card for that kind of thing, and for the meta, like I said, I have, where it's not super interaction heavy. This just puts a damper on that even more. And next up here, we have Sign of the Ur Dragon. This one's kind of a weird one, but it's a really cool one to throw in here, because it's 12 mana, which seems kind of scary, but thankfully it has Domain. So it costs 2 less to cast for each basic land type among lands you control. And so that's really, really good with this mana base, because we're running so many Triomes, and you get to all 5 land types pretty fast. So that reduces his cost immediately to 2. And then, of course, Ur Dragon always reduces it 1 more. So there's been a lot of times I can cast this for 1 or sometimes 0 mana if you have the right reducers. So you get a 4/4 with flying for 0 mana. By itself, it's a dragon. That's cool. But it also has this last line of text that says, creatures you control have vigilance if they're white, hexproof if they're blue, lifelink if they're black, and first strike if they're red, and trample if they're green, which is a whole lot. It's a whole bunch of different keywords. Most of the time it's just going to be first strike, because everything you control is red, though the green does matter. Getting trample is pretty good. And, you know, sometimes I feel like it's kind of weird. Like, you think, you know, white might be lifelink instead of vigilance, and death touch if it's black. So they kind of metered it out so it's not super duper crazy, like red isn't haste or something insane. But a really cool card. And the hexproof can also matter as well for some of the blue dragons, and mostly Tiamat and Ur Dragon, having that extra protection there. And that's really the awesome thing with it, is with Tiamat and Ur Dragon, that your 2 5-color dragons, they get all those keywords, which is pretty insane. Especially like the lifelink I've had come in clutch so many times for me. Where just getting that, you know, you're really down on life total, you're down to maybe 19 or less, you know, whatever, like down less than half of your life, and just even hitting with Ur Dragon, even if you don't get through, you're still gaining 10 life, and it's a huge deal. It gives you some breathing room. Sign of Dragon is just another really cool card to throw in here that's really easy to cast. And the next up we have Scourge of Valkus, which is that sort of second half of Dragon Tempest. So it says, whenever Scourge of Valkus or another dragon enters the battlefield under your control, deals X damage to any target or X is the number of dragons you control. So same sort of thing, except this one's really cool because it works with stuff like Miram, and also double triggers off Roaming Throne. So most of the games I win are with these sort of burn effects, because it doesn't require you to have haste. It just requires you to play some stuff, get a whole bunch of creatures, and kind of wipe out the board. It's usually the simplest win, because you just kind of overpower with a whole bunch of burn. And so that's kind of one of the last burn card here in the deck is Terror of the Peaks. It's sort of it's a better one earlier on when you have less creatures out, because instead of dealing damage equal to the number of creatures you control, whenever a creature enters, it deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. So this one's good when you only have like 1 or 2 dragons down, but you know, you play an old Gnawbone or an ancient or a Goldspan dragon or whatever, and you can ping stuff down if you really need to. And that's why there's not super heavy amount of removal, because you have cards like this that can kind of just kill stuff if you need to. But usually it's sent upstairs to the face, because you're just able to kill people really, really fast with it. That's usually where I go, especially if you can Miram any of these. That's usually game with 1 or 2 more dragons coming down, or maybe you have a laugh list that you can get even more triggers out of it. You're just throwing a bunch of stuff down and they can just die from that. And if you happen to somehow have a Fire Emancipation down, getting even more damage out there is really, really good. So yeah, that's kind of just the game plan there. One of the easiest ways to get the win is just to hit people in the face. And the next we have a Teamer SNNC. So this is another one that kind of does both things. It gives you card draw and it gives you haste. So it just gives your creatures haste. Very good. Something we really need for the deck. Really awesome. And the Teamer color doesn't really matter with the mana base. We're usually fixed. So it's really not that much to try to really pay for. And whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters your battlefield, you draw a card. So again, just a little bit of extra card draw. You're playing pretty much any of the dragons are going to trigger this ability, and they can swing immediately. That's really the bigger part of it, but the card draw is also nice. So just another really cool value card. And lastly here, this is one of the newest includes to the deck, is Twin Flame Tyrant. Not only does it have amazing artwork, but it has a really cool effect. So if a source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent, it deals double that damage. So it's kind of just a slightly lesser firing emancipation, but it's on a creature, which is really cool. And, you know, Miram, Roaming Throne, that sort of effect, you can double it. It's way easier to double. And 5 mana, 3/5 dragon. You know, pretty cool for 4 mana if you have their dragon. Just kind of another cool value card, and one that I was like, immediately saw within Foundations, and that's kind of actually what made me fall in love with the set, was this card, this specific artwork. I think it looks awesome, and a really cool card to add to a fully full art deck, but also just a really, really good effect, because there's only the 2 damage doublers in the deck, tripler in this case, which can matter a whole lot. If you're able to deal 20 damage instead of 10 with Ur Dragon, almost dealing immediately commander damage, you know, killing someone out with that, it's pretty insane, even for little stuff. Even if you're only swinging with a Goldspan Dragon, getting 8 damage off of that instead is awesome. You know, it's just a really, really good effect. Yeah, that's kind of the general overview of the deck. We'll also go through real quick the lands here, just so you can kind of see why this deck is so expensive. So firstly, we do have all 10 of the shock lands in here. And they are all, I really did like the Infinity stuff, and I feel like it was kind of underutilized. I really, really like the Infinity Shocklands, so we've got all those in here. And one of them, I did pull a Galaxy Foil one, which is why this one's so expensive. So all of those, which are really, really cool. I think all of our basic lands are the Galaxy, I don't know if they're Galaxy Foil, but they're at least the Galaxy artwork. Really, really cool, just kind of fits in the theme. And then we have quite a few fetches. I'm hoping to at one point get a lot more in here, and I'm turning them all into the Expedition fetches, which does about double their price most of the time, so they're kind of expensive. I think there's about 5 in here right now. Yeah, Shocklands, all that sort of thing. We do have some Triumphs, which are actually kind of on the spending side as well. They're about the price of a fetch, about 13 bucks. I think we got 3 or 4 of those in here. And then up here we have an Ancient Tomb that I got from a box that's in foil, which is very easy to take out. This is not necessary. And I will say one thing to look out for with this deck is you will lose life very fast. There have been times that I've, you know, lost close to 10 life in a turn because you're using, you know, Ancient Tomb, and you're, you know, shocking and bolting in a land by, you know, fetching and shocking with, you know, some sort of like a Godless Shrine or whatever. You're losing a bunch of life, and then you've also got, you know, Vampiric Tutor and things that are dealing you damage. So you can lose a lot of life really fast with this deck, so you kind of want to pace yourself. And then we've got a few just generically good, you know, City of Brass, Forbidden Orchard, Reflecting Pool, that kind of stuff that just kind of taps for our colors. It kind of fixes those a little bit more. Cavern of Souls, because it does, I actually have it matter a lot because of how crazy dragons are. People are going to be holding up counters and removal for them. Getting that uncounterability is super huge, especially if you're casting something like a Hellkite Courser, where you're not only getting the free spell here, but you're getting this here. Just making sure your stuff sticks. And then at the bottom here, we've also got the World Trees, kind of our last version of mana fixing. Once you hit 6 lands, you can kind of just tap stuff or whatever. It's just a cool little extra thing here. And I did at one point run a Masquid Nexus in here to make all creatures, no matter where they are, if they're in the deck or whatever, every creature type, just for this card, because it allowed you to tutor up all your dragons. But there are so few times in the deck you're getting to double Wooburg mana, really 11 mana if you're counting the World Tree itself to try to get to that, and that you also have Masquid Nexus on the field. That didn't really make any sense. So you're really just using this. It's really not that bad to have one, you know, tap land in the deck that isn't a Triumph, to have that mana fixing, because it can come up a lot. There are times in the deck you still need that mana because you are pretty mana intensive. You know, you need 2 green here, 3 green here, 3 green there, you know, Teamer here. So there are definitely mana building restrictions there. Thankfully, a lot of the precons anymore come with all of the good dual lands, like the Tangle lands, the Pain lands, you know, the Check lands, whatever. They come with a lot of those lands anymore, and so they're really not expensive to get. You can still make a pretty decent mana base here with a lot of the cheap lands that are out now, which I think is really cool. Because for a long time that was not the case, and it was really hard to build a deck because you had to go, you know, back and get, you know, pay, you know, $8-10 for a Pain land or whatever to try to get a decent mana base that wasn't all tap land. So I think that's really cool. And then down here we also have another one that's pretty easy to take out with 3 Tree City. A lot of times this isn't going super mana positive because this isn't a super go wide deck unless, you know, you're making a bunch of tokens. But, you know, on the occasion it's still making you some extra mana, and I was just like, yeah, you might as well throw this card in here, you know. It's a tribal deck. You might as well have the option for extra mana if you really need it. But yeah, that is the overview of the Dragon deck I've got here. I hope you have super enjoyed it. I know I have. I do like going through all of these cards and kind of explaining them, especially for people that haven't played the game a whole lot or don't know a lot of the decks that get played. I know this one's extremely popular, and a lot of people don't know how this deck is piloted, so I hope that this, maybe lessens your worries on the deck or maybe increase them because you know how it works now. Besides that, I do hope that everyone here has enjoyed and has kind of gained some information on whether or not they want to build this deck, or, I hope I've educated at least somewhat, and make sure to look forward to a bunch of new ones in the future. I'll be uploading these on Mondays at noon MST from now on, so make sure to look for those. I'm going to be having a whole bunch of deck lists. I have a whole bunch in the backlog right now. Should be all of my actual decks, so if you, care about that kind of thing, I do have all of it, and they are tested, so I do have a lot to say on a lot of them, and I kind of know what I'm doing because I've had these decks for a lot of them quite a few years, so I've really kind of gotten seasoned with them and had the experience, so you can kind of at least have the confidence that this comes from someone that knows what they're talking about at least a little bit, or at least I hope so. But yeah, besides that, I really do hope you have enjoyed it, and I will see all of you in the next one.